The Sistine Chapel has been the site of papal elections since 1492 and of Michelangelo's famed ceiling since 1512. For more than 500 years, the College of Cardinals has selected the new pope underneath that ceiling. And outside the chapel, in St. Peter's Square, Catholics have gathered on the death of the pope to await the coronation of a new one. Electing a pope is far from easy. In 1268, infighting among the cardinals prolonged the election until 1271. The magistrates, anxious to have a new pope, locked the cardinals in the palace of Viterbo and reduced their rations to bread and water only, and it still took another year for them to come to a decision. In 2015, a class at the University of Chicago on the Italian Renaissance set out to understand the messy inner workings of the papal conclave by simulating an election.
There are several goals to having this be a simulation. One is when people have a personal investment in a side and care about a city, a family, a place as something that they have championed, defended, fought, care about these other families as somebody who I betrayed or somebody who betrayed me or someone who I was allied with and grateful to. You remember them differently. So coming out of this to then read The Prince feels deeply immersive and different from just reading it in the abstract. Another part of it is to get people out of a modern mindset and more tolerant of understanding faction fighting, factionalism, and alliances. Because often, for example, when we read Dante, and Dante talks about Guelphs and Ghibellines and faction fighting, and he hates Pisa so much, and he talks about particular families who were enemies and betrayed him, and hates evil popes, and hates people who are neutral in political conflicts. All of that is very difficult to wrap our heads around. People who read Dante for the first time find all of those elements of it very abstract and very distancing and very alienating. But if you read it having done this, you understand how self-interestedly profitable it is to be neutral in a faction fight, and why somebody might hate people who are neutral in a faction fight. And you understand what it's like to have an enemy city that you hate, and what it's like to have an allied family that you care deeply about. And so again, it's an immersive feeling that I think gives a much more period authenticity and a greater ability to understand these texts, communicated more quickly through the simulation than I could do it in lecture.
Each student was given a character to portray. Some were leading cardinals vying for the papacy, others were mere vote counters. Everyone was given information about their character's goals, temperament, history, relationships, strengths, and weaknesses. The students were instructed to try and achieve their goals while staying true to their character. Some wanted to go on a crusade. Others wanted a flourishing of humanism. Some characters started the game bitter rivals, others as close allies. All of these character aspects had to be kept in mind to accurately simulate a Renaissance papal election.
I played Cardinal Ippolito d'Este. Cardinal d'Este is the Cardinal of Hungary and Ferrara, and he's the younger brother of Duke Alfonso of Ferrara, and he comes from the most noble line in Italy.
My character was Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici. I was a 16-year-old cardinal, the youngest cardinal in the history of the papacy, thanks to my rich and powerful father, Lorenzo.
So I was Cardinal Ascanio Sforza of Milan. So my character's main goals were Milan and Sforza first above everything. And that basically led me to play like a pro-Italian nationalist almost game, where I played up the threats out from the outside world onto Italy, played down the damage in between, and tried not to pick sides between various inter-Italian conflicts. And that was because Milan was thoroughly threatened from the French, and the only way I could save it was by rallying Italians to help me. I kept the papal armies for myself. I wanted all 9 of them, because that's just a huge fighting force. And so I kind of knew that if I got the papacy, I was guaranteed all that military force, and I could pretty much defend myself without counting on anybody else. In addition, if I got the papacy, I made sure nobody else was strengthened to fight against me.
I played Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere from Genoa. As a character, he is bellicose. he wanted the papacy to restore the Roman Empire and to act as a successor to the Roman Empire. He thought that Italy had to be free of foreign influence. He didn't want the emperor to have an influence in Italy. He didn't want the king of France to have an influence. This put him in kind of a tricky position early on because Della Rovere starts off the game with an alliance with the king of France. This put me in a tricky position because on one hand I wanted the papacy to be independent and Italy to be independent of foreign alliance, but on the other hand I was sort of beholden to the French and had to do things that they wanted to some degree.
I think that the two characters who would make the best pope are Rene Dupré, who is a virtuous, sincere, godly-minded person, and similarly Della Porta, Cardinal Della Porta, who is incredibly intelligent veteran politician, neutral on every single subject, Italian so nobody hates him, politically savvy. But of course the wrench that I throw into the works for that character is to have that character be secretly a woman. So if that character is elected pope, then that character will be executed.
I'm Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia. I am, or I was, Count Duke or Archbishop of Valencia, so I'm from Spain, but I've lived over 20 years of my life, of my life in Rome as the papal treasurer for the previous popes. So when I first got it, it said, "You are friendless," and I was like, God damn it, no one likes me. So I guess I'm not gonna become pope. I'll just focus on being king. Maybe I'll get Urbino. I'm gonna try to become friends with Florence.
Well, I was very happy with the character I got. It was very much kind of the guy I would have been, I think, in that period. The political landscape, I actually had no idea what to expect. I knew I was related to various other important players, but I didn't know how much of a minefield the landscape actually was. I had two main allies. I had Giuliano della Rovere from Genoa as well, and also Ascanio Sforza, who was my cousin. I was kind of a vassal of Della Rovere, and it seemed that Della Rovere would be quite a political pope who sought the seat more to gratify his own ambition than to than to be the ruler of the spiritual Christian world.
Okay, so I was lucky in the regard that I had a ton of resources, especially money. I had like so much more money than all the other characters, so I knew that would be really useful. But as far as how that was going to help me accomplish my goals, I wasn't too sure. Like, I didn't have a lot of natural alliances. I was friends with like Cesare Borgia and Alessandro Farnese from school, but neither of them were cardinals. I was close to Orsini, who was a cardinal, but I didn't have like necessarily a built-in faction to side with. So my main concern was protecting Florence, first and foremost, kind of winning Florence over. There was, my father was on the verge of dying, and there was no guarantee the city would pass on to my family, so I had to secure Florence for my family. And then a secondary, but almost equally important goal was like setting myself up well for the future to eventually one day become pope.
I was very nervous. I had gone over my character sheet and I realized that there were around 3 or 4 situations which seemed fairly common in which people would succeed in killing me. So I remember getting the character sheet and being at the dining table and showing it to my friend and basically saying, "This is Della Rovere. He's a bellicose guy who I'm completely in his power, and if I, step out of line, he may try to kill me or betray me. This is Pierre d'Aubusson. He's from the Knights Hospitalier. If he finds out that I have this secret screw up with the Turkish half-brother of the Sultan, he's probably going to try to kill me. This is the Borgia and Cesare Borgia, who are the enemy of my patron, who is himself dangerous. If they find out that I'm sleeping with Lucrezia Borgia, they're probably going to try to kill me."
I looked at through the package and I thought, wow, I have a really good shot at being Pope. And I looked through, what my priorities were and what my motivations were, And, I thought to myself, like, wow, this guy, everyone's going to love him. He's got a lot going for him. He cares about the city. He's got the Emperor's ear. There's nothing holding him back from getting exactly what he wants.
A lot of work went into balancing the chances of the players, and in particular to balancing the two sort of head contenders for the throne, which are Giuliano della Rovere and Rodrigo Borgia. And I worked very hard to give them parallel resources, parallel numbers of allies, etc. So for example, in the second iteration, I added one help character for each of them, so that della Rovere got Raffaele Riario as a character whose sole goal is help Giuliano della Rovere, at the same time that Borgia got Cardinal Carafa.
My strengths were that I didn't have any enemies, and a lot of people didn't know sort of the cruelty that I could impose on others. Everyone just thought I was like a really rich, jovial cardinal, but in reality, of course, I had my own goals. It was pretty clear that I wanted to keep Ferrara safe, but also I think people didn't realize the extent to which I was willing to go to do it.
At the start of the first day, the clear frontrunner in the election was Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere.
I was very confident in my chances to become Pope because as I looked over my character sheet and counted up all my allies, I saw that I had 8. And that's pretty close to the 15 needed to become Pope. And I didn't think any other candidate had as many allies as I did. So I thought I had really good chances. I thought I was definitely the front runner. Before the first session, I met with the French cardinals and the King of France, Louis, and we went over our objectives. The main thing we spoke about was how I would be elected Pope. We all seemed on the same page. None of us had really any problems. We were in agreement about everything. I knew that Ascanio Sforza was probably going to be my enemy because the French were trying to attack him, and I was aligned with the French. Aside from the French alliance, my main allies were very, very trustworthy and great partners. They were Cardinals Raffaele Riario and Bembo. One of my allies, Cardinal Gentili, betrayed me. He went over, at first he was a little bit standoffish and wasn't willing to pledge his support, but as time went on, it was clear that he had betrayed me. He was going over to Sforza, and we just declared ourselves to be enemies with each other, which caused there to be civil war in Genoa.
So della Rovere approached me at the beginning of the election, seeking my unwavering support, and at the beginning, I just told him that I wasn't ready to offer it. After I realized that indeed Sforza had a strong case, I betrayed della Rovere.
Going in, I had della Rovere and Borgia were my two kind of top choices. Side with one or the other. They seem to be the most powerful, have kind of the most sway.
So originally I thought that della Rovere would be a good ally for my character because as I was sitting at my desk looking at the public information about the characters, looking at my personal opinions about the characters, I realized that della Rovere is a good Italian, that maybe you're a little bit too close with the French, but I could bring you back to the Italian cause. And you liberated from the French would be a good Italian Pope. One of my main goals was make sure the Pope is Italian.
I wasn't sure that della Rovere was going to win. I think he didn't have as many allies as I think he should have.
Della Rovere, I knew I was supposed to hate him. But I was like, I never spoke to this guy. He hasn't given me a reason to.
Sforza had actually messaged me before the first session because we're allies. His older brother is married to my sister. And so my sister is Duchess of Milan, which is why I wanted to keep Milan safe. But I think I was also a bit apprehensive about committing all my troops to Milan, because I wasn't sure if he was going to win, so I wanted to keep my options open.
My very first conversation was with Orsini, who was my natural ally, and he had expressed that he wanted to see an Italian pope. Out of that, we said, okay, what are our options there? Della Rovere was mentioned. Sforza was his number one choice, And that was the first time I kind of had considered Sforza.
I very quickly found allies in people like the Medici, the d'Este, Grand Inquisitor Toriani. Orsini was pretty friendly as well, and it became pretty easy to collect a core voting block, which you could then leverage onto people that were harder to get by showing them that you already were potentially going to win.
The first session, I was just like, nope, not even going to try to be Pope. And then I got like 5 votes. I was like, oh, still not going to try to be Pope.
Though no other cardinal had as much support as Della Rovere, other factions began to materialize almost immediately.
So at the start of the game, I actually tried not to play my hand and reveal that I wanted to become Pope. I spent the majority of the first day just sounding it out, and then only by the second round of voting did I really actually push to become Pope. I immediately gravitated away from Della Rovere because he was in the French camp and the French were my arch rivals. And Borgia I was pretty worried about because I thought they were really connected with the Spanish. And then the few others like Della Porta and Colonna just weren't powerful enough to win, in my opinion. And so I thought, I have a great shot at going for this. I've got a lot I can say in terms of my independence that makes me supportable, and I have a lot to offer people because of some early important alliances I made.
And then, actually the only reason I tried to be Pope later was because Sforza sent messages to Isabella that were... She said that he needed his ego to be like trimmed down a bit. And then I was like, oh bitch, this shit is on.
I was basically trying to find out if Isabella was looking to conquer things or not. I didn't threaten her directly, if that's the implication I'm getting. I basically, in my mind, I was standing up for myself. In the sense that, like, I'm not just going to roll over. Italians, want to remain independent, and surely you can respect that because you wouldn't want, bloodshed in the kingdoms of Italy, which is, kind of a barb at her because she obviously does want to take over Italy, but she's meant to be playing a Christian queen.
So technically my relationship with her was supposed to be that I don't trust her. But very early on she gained my trust. Because she messaged me, she was like, my job is to do what God wants. And God wants you to become Pope, right? And I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll go with that. And so she was willing to invest florins and like everything. So it was a very loyal relationship to each other.
The first session is very much people getting their land legs in how this works, although in all iterations it's been, people have expressed to me that they've been surprised how quickly they fell into being able to be in character and be immersed in this world. Almost always when I get a batch of letters at the end of the first day, they're full of comments that at the beginning people weren't sure what to do, but then they figured it out by the end. So that the action accelerates over the course of the event. And the first one is usually fairly quiet with a rush of early sensible alliances and early sensible marriages as people are accomplishing their most simple goals. And the voting pattern at the beginning is almost always the same, with the French uniting behind Della Rovere in a very powerful Della Rovere bloc at the beginning, and then the other cardinals much lower than that, as secret forces have not yet allied to make coalitions.
And obviously the French contingent was with Della Rovere from the beginning, right? The reason that my character sort of went with that, because he acts kind of as a proxy, right? His interests are the French contingent's interests because he's a French, he's a French subject, right? He's loyal to King Louis.
Sforza's skillful maneuvering and the threat of a French invasion of Milan made it easy for him to gain support. In the first ballot, Della Rovere had 8 votes and Sforza had 3. By the second, Della Rovere had 8 votes and Sforza had 7.
After the first day, it became pretty clear to me that not only was Della Rovere close to the French, but he was taking orders from the French King Louis XII, and he had a whole contingent of French cardinals as his support. So it became pretty clear to me that no longer was Della Rovere a good Italian, and I couldn't really ally with him for that reason, so I put myself behind Sforza.
I thought Milan was in a very dangerous position. I thought the French were definitely going to attack, and so I think that was why I supported Sforza. And if the French made it past Milan, I thought that they were going to come for Ferrara, because it's so close. And so I thought that if I pledged my troops to Milan, it would act as a barrier between Ferrara and France.
By the end of the second day, Sforza had 8 votes to Della Rovere's 7. The second session ended with a new frontrunner in the election, but the road to the papal throne is long, and the election was far from over. While the lions of the conclave wrangled over St. Peter's chair, another world hummed along, affected by the papal race, but not a part of it. The conclave had many cardinals with more modest goals than becoming leader of the Catholic Church.
I was Cesare Borgia. He is the bastard child of Rodrigo Borgia. He has really no home, no fatherland. He, in the election that we did, was 16 years old. He is evil. He's Machiavellian. He will kill anyone that transgresses him. He likes to go around, break people's bones. Most people hated me just because I kind of poisoned a lot of people.
And helping run the election were the functionaries, the humble vote counters nobody ever suspected of playing an important role in politics. They give a different perspective on the conclave.
My character was Alessandro Farnese. I'm 16 years old, a nobleman of Rome. Yeah, I was about 60,000 florins in debt. And so that was my primary objective, really, was to try to get rid of a lot of that debt. Yeah, everyone was very cagey, I thought, as a vote counter. Ostensibly we're all very simple characters, but I knew, of course, that I had a lot of backstory, and I could only assume that they all did too. And I think, everyone was kind of keeping their votes that they got very close to their chest. And I don't know, it was a bit more tense than you might expect up there in the vote counting chamber. Both Cesare and Leo knew that I could likely become a cardinal. I talked with them about that early on.
So kept really close to Alessandro Farnese and Leo Medici, because Medici has money and he's my school friend, and Farnese is in debt, and I know that he could probably help me because he's Roman. So I had to keep in touch with my schoolmates because they're really the only people besides Captain Corella that I trusted in the entire election.
And then they were also just my old school friends, and I think, right at the beginning, Leo paid off all the debt I owed him, which was 25,000 florins. And I think he did that just because, we had been friends for a long time.
I was Micheletto Corella. I was the captain of the Papal Guard. I was an assassin, a renowned assassin. I was known as the Angel of Death. I was in the conclave because I was serving as Cesare Borgia's bodyguard and personal assassin. Cesare was a pretty crafty and ambitious fellow, and he wasn't exactly on the best of terms with his father.
To his face, I had to be obedient. On the other hand, I kind of hate him. I'm a bastard. He's not really, technically my legal father.
First of all, I had that big sword, which I wasn't allowed to use because killing is forbidden in the chapel. But I could, just finger it threateningly. I'm physically intimidating. I could confiscate items from people. I could break arms and legs.
I was sleeping with Lucrezia Borgia. I was having a passionate love affair with her. She reminded me of the Lucrezia of the days of ancient Rome. She was an incredibly beautiful, smart, and cultured woman. The only problem is, if any of the ruthless Borgias found out about the affair, they would surely kill me. Therefore, one of my goals was to somehow keep sleeping with her in a sanctioned way, because the way we were doing it right now was incredibly dangerous.
Obviously I was in love with my sister, Lucrezia. So, I had this relationship going on at the very beginning that, I want to have sex with her.
So what I had to do was either try to marry her off to some minor cardinal who I could then intercede with, or somehow get her into a Dominican nunnery, which weirdly enough I managed to accomplish by convincing Annio of Viterbo that he had to convince the Grand Inquisitor that he had to convince Rodrigo Borgia to put Lucrezia Borgia in the nunnery.
And then when I found out that she was exchanging smutty letters with Bembo, obviously I broke his arms and legs.
The Borgias realized I was like this irritating, gadfly that they should swat, so they tried to kind of halt me. And, what happened after that was Cesare Borgia sewed up my lips, so I couldn't talk for a little bit.
I come in to the papal election with a assumed identity. I am Father Dioneo. This is a completely fake invented person. I am actually Julia Farnese. So if anybody finds out who I am, I will merely be executed because I am a woman impersonating a priest in the papal election. Like, it's all, like, there are many reasons why that just would get me killed. My main goal behind not getting killed is to become the mistress to the next pope, because that would take care of all of our money problems. The first day actually was a little hectic because I was one of the vote counters and we were kind of still trying to figure out how that was going to be run. Like, we had like certain times which votes had to be in and make sure that cardinals got votes to us, and then all of them had to be recorded. And this just took a lot more work, I think, than anybody really expected it to take. Especially when cardinals were like running off into like corners of the, you know, of the chapel. I was also trying to figure out like, basically, you know, how sinful were these cardinals, you know? Because if they were not interested in a mistress, if they were actually celibate the way they were supposed to be, they were useless to me. Borgia was very far behind. The reason why I had Borgia as my, you know, number one spot was I knew that he had all of the like characteristics that I was looking for in a pope, basically. He was, you know, known to have mistresses.
Unbeknownst to the frontrunners, the functionaries would play a crucial role behind the scenes.
And the functionaries are interesting from my perspective, and something that I hope everyone in the game realizes, because at first, usually the cardinals just ignore the functionaries and assume that the functionaries are just sort of there and don't really matter very much. Whereas the functionaries are actually immensely powerful and useful, because they're just as capable as anyone else of talking to people, getting information, trading information, manipulating, promising, and especially persuading.